getting in there, is I got two videos. Right, since we don't have sermonettes and it's the 4th of July, we traditionally play a little a video. So I got two of them this short, one 4 minutes, one 3 minutes. The one we're going to play first, I thought just were spectacular the way the company has done them. So I want to share that with our audience and with all of you here. And the second one is our introduction for News Nuggets and Insights this week. So Jeff, if you're ready, let's play that first one. but I wanted to share that with you. The second one I want to play, we played as our intro for News Nuggets and Insights this past week, and it pertains to our freedom in prayer. I wanted to end that with today with the prayer of our video before we bring in our special music and our guest speaker. All right, Jeff, let's play the second one. Well, that was our intro this week for News Nuggets and Insights, so I hope you appreciate that. We don't have much longer left in this nation before Christ returns, unless this nation repents. Everything you just saw there are nothing but platitudes for the rest of the nation. God will answer and heal and watch over his people who will repent and humble, which God willing we will. If it doesn't repent, we need to pray that God will end it quickly.
Good afternoon to all of you on this eve of July 4th. This is the beginning of our 245th year, 245 years ago. You say, well, that's a long time, isn't it? But then I'm almost in another year or two be 70. You take 70 and divide it into 245, and that's 3.5 times. So when we do it like that, it's not that long ago that our founding fathers put forth the Declaration of Independence. And after seeing the videos, maybe I should just sit down and let that be the sermon. Powerful witness of what God has done for us. and sometimes in spite of us. A few weeks ago, the end of May, my wife and I went to West Texas. And I know that those who have lived in this area all their lives would not imagine what a desert would be like. We are surrounded by water here in this area. But in the high desert, there is very little water, and sometimes wonder how cactus, mesquite, sagebrush, all that ever survives. But it is outstanding. It is beautiful in its own way, but it is a very desolate land. I'm talking about West Texas, in the Chihuahuan Desert, there north of Big Bend. And I was reawakened to what the West was like. But I happened to have the opportunity to stop in a little town called Fort Davis. Fort Davis is on the route between San Antonio and El Paso. Had an army fort there back in the mid-1800s. And I'm looking around, I'm talking to the park ranger, and the topic of water came up. You have horses, you've got men, you've got a fort, you're out in the middle of what I would call no place, out in the no man's land. Where's the water? And this is 2021. And in the 1850s, she said, the park ranger said, there is plenty of water. Look over there, you'll see where there would have been a natural stream to give the army the necessary water that was needed. And I got to thinking about what God has not done for us, in the sense that He left those areas in the West uninhabitable. I did some research. I should probably say up front who my sources are, right? Where do I get all this information? Well, everybody uses Google, right? That's where to find all the answers, right? I happen to have a set of books called the Annals of America. It was put out by Encyclopedia Britannica. And these run through the beginning of the nation back in the 1400s when Christopher Columbus came to this continent, and then on up through when they finished back in 1975. That's the last I have of them. But they are pretty much year by year of all the major important messages, letters, speeches that were delivered throughout the course of the United States. So that's one of my sources. And then I also was able to find a book on the shelf there in our house called Marketing of Evil by David Kupelian. And I don't necessarily recommend it unless you have a strong stomach, but it is a very eye-opening book. Of what I want to talk about today is what God left and did not finish as far as a nation, and why, and what we need to be doing as Christians in this day and age. So out west, there's not much. There's beautiful mountains. Of course, the mountains rise up above the high desert. We're talking about the 4,000 to 5,000 foot level, and then the mountains go higher up. A land that's desolate. I'm reminded of what God said when He brought the children of Israel into the land of promise. We would turn back to Judges. Chapter 2, Judges chapter 2, verse 21. Judges chapter 2, verse 21. He says to the people, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died. That's a very severe statement. Why did he do that? So that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Eternal, to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. A test. And I look at the West. There's about 30% of this country that's desert. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and shortly it will be 40%. And if it continues as dry as it's been, it'll reach about 50% of this nation. Considering all that, 47% of this country is not inhabited. Not that it's not able to support life. There's a lot of areas that's farmland, rivers, mountains, that life could exist. But 47% of this nation is not where we could grow the good crops that we needed. God refused to drive them out, to test them. What did God do for us? He opened up this great land. Pilgrims, the Puritans, the settlers came to the East Coast, settled on the East Coast, and then they got itchy. They couldn't stay put. They had to get over the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. Daniel Boone, finding trails, ways to get to what we call the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky. And then that wasn't enough. And then there was the push forward to the West Coast. So here we are, 245 years later, since the Declaration of Independence. How well have we done as a nation? When we look at the wealth that God provided for us, how well have we done? So he says here in verse 23 of Judges chapter 2, "Therefore the Eternal left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua." He left the land in a certain condition that it would test the children of Israel whether they would obey God or not. And if they obeyed God, he would have continued to push them out. When they didn't, and they married into the other nations and had idolatry and everything else, he just began to kind of squeeze them down and let them deal with the problem. And somehow, that's the way it's been in this nation. God opened it up, but he's been squeezing it down now as the West continues to dry. What was the heat this past week in the Northwest? Seattle, Portland. They're used to having that cool breeze coming off the cold ocean, because that's the northern tip of the Pacific, and its water is usually about 50 degrees, even in the summertime. And that cools all that Olympic Peninsula, all that land before the mountains. Times are changing. I was here 6 months ago, and at that time, what did I say? I said, it's over. What has happened in these past 6 months is unbelievable. It seems like we have compacted 10 years of life into 6 months. Our lives are changed, and they're not getting any better. So I want to go to Habakkuk. I want to start over here in Habakkuk, chapter 1. Something very important that God inspired to be written. Habakkuk is one of the minor prophets. It's right after Nahum. It says in verse 1, the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. He says, O Eternal, how long shall I cry? When I see what's happening in this country, when I see the problems that we're facing, it hurts. It hurts. We saw beautiful videos just right before this sermon about what God did for us. And it hurts when I see that the nation has lost its, what I call its soul. A reason for living, a reason for being, why we're alive, why we should be patriotic, why should we believe in this nation, how excited we should be to see the flag waving brightly in the morning sunlight, like Francis Scott Key. And so Habakkuk says, how long shall I cry? How long must my tears fall down on the bed where I'm praying? Surely all that's happening around us is stirring us up inside. It's changing us. It should be drawing us closer to the eternal. He's our only hope. And he says, and you will not hear. And sometimes I pray, and I don't think God's hearing. Yet I know he does. But this is what Habakkuk says, and you will not hear. And we know that God's not going to answer the prayers. He's going to say it's too late. He says, seek me while I may be found, because there's coming a time when he won't be found. He goes on to say, even cry out to you, violence. Aren't we driven to a point where we just wish we could do something about it? Get people by the back of their necks and say, wake up. How can we allow this violence? It didn't end last summer. It's continued throughout these past 6 months. I look at that video that they've taped and recorded in New York City. An older fellow and the two little kids, a boy and a girl, stumbling over themselves, trying to escape the anger of this person shooting at them. How they survived, I do not know, except for the grace of God. And this is what churns within me. Habakkuk goes on to say, and you will not save. This is his cry to the eternal. Why don't you save? Why don't you stop it? Why don't you put an end to it? Why do you show me iniquity? Why can't you show me the beauty of this great land? Why can't you show me the beauty of the kingdom? Why can't you show me what lies beyond? Why must I see all the sins and cause me to see trouble and trial and problems? And that's where the church is today. If we're attentive, if we're alert, if we're awake, if we're watching, for plundering and violence are before me. I can't put the visions of last summer out of my head. The burning in the streets from Minneapolis to Washington, New York City, and other cities of which I probably don't even know. I don't know what happened here in New Orleans. Houston seemed to have been spared. There is strife and contention that it continues to arise. Hatred. I have never in all my life witnessed so much hatred. Where? In government. What? Government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not there. Therefore, the law is powerless. Defund the police. Do away with the law. We don't need it. See, it's amazing. People think, well, if we don't have the law, we can't have any problems. Everything will be good and perfect. Doesn't work that way. But the law is powerless. Why? Because of our judicial system. There's justice for me, but not for thee. It's a two-tier justice system. That's what he goes on to say. And justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. And that's what's happening. It's like we're getting strangled. And therefore, perverse judgment proceeds. And God doesn't answer Habakkuk. He doesn't answer him and say, well, this is why I'm going to do it. This is why all this is happening to you. No, he says, look, I'm going to interfere. I'm going to raise up the nation of Babylon, the Chaldeans. When Habakkuk heard that, it drove him further to his knees and pleaded with God and asked God, why would he use a nation more evil than Judah to punish Judah? He reasoned with the Eternal. You read it. I don't have time to go through all of it. He reasoned with the Eternal. And then he says in verse 1 of chapter 2, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what God, the Eternal, will say to me and what I will answer when I am reproved. Reminds me of Job. You know, Job went through a lot of trials and problems. God finally had to reprove him and show him just how mighty the Eternal is. I want to leave you right here to think about this. See how we're doing as a church. Think about our soul. Think about our relationship with the Eternal. How much this churns our stomach, motivates us to cry out to the Eternal, because he says he's going to put a sign, a mark on all those who sigh and cry for all the abominations done in the land. Habakkuk is very deeply moved by what he sees around him in the land of Judah. I thought I would go back, since I had been out to the fort and was being reminded of the 1800s, to bring to you not too much of a history. Some people don't like history, especially if there's a lot of dates. Who likes dates, right? That's what I hated in high school. Trying to cram all these dates into my head and missed the concepts, missed the principles, missed the overall thought idea that the teacher, professor was trying to bring across to the class. But I want to just start here. We all know what happened here in 1803, do we not? God gave us this territory, this Louisiana Purchase. In 1807, Fulton, what'd he do? He put together a steamboat, right? And he churned up that Hudson River from New York City to Albany in about at 50 miles an hour, right? No, not hardly. He went at the speed of 5 miles per hour, and it took him about 32 hours to go from New York City to Albany. But what was it? It was a new invention, steam power. It proved that machine could outdo man and beast. It made this nation what it is today. It started the wheels turning. Steam power. Of course, we had so much wood back then that even though coal was discovered in the 1600s and was being mined in the 1700s, it wasn't until the early 1800s that it became more dominant, because you could always find wood, cut trees down, lots of wood. But finally, they used coal in the early 1800s. 1836, the first settlers went west. We know of the Oregon Trail. It lasted between 1843 and 1869. Middle part of the 1800s, just that's all you got to know. Middle part of the 1800s. 400,000 settlers went west. 1/5 settled in Oregon. Most of them was in California. Why? What happened in 1849? Gold. A mad dash to the Pacific. Yes. But before gold, what did we have? The telegram. The telegraph was invented. Goodbye, Pony Express. Don't need those brave young men riding across the country on horseback delivering the mail. The telegraph. Iron ore, also that year in Michigan and Minnesota in 1888. That began to develop the steel industry. Alaska. We bought Alaska, and these are things I forgot. We bought Alaska in 1867. Oh, I remember Seward. It was his folly. It was his ice box. But we paid Russia $7.2 million, 2 cents an acre. Now, imagine if we hadn't bought Alaska. It belonged to Russia. What if we hadn't moved Russia out of California? What if Russia was in Cuba? What if Russia was in South America or Latin America, Central America? God saw fit to move Russia away from us. Bessemer, we all know of the blast furnace. See, we had cast iron. We didn't know how to make steel. We didn't know we had to throw oxygen, air into that furnace in order to produce steel. But they invented it. And now the trains can move. Why? Because in 1869, that gold spike was driven into that last railroad tie at Promontory Point in Utah. And the mad dash was on to get railroad track laid as fast as they could. Northern Pacific. We had the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific. Then you had the Central Pacific. You got the Santa Fe. You got the Wabash Cannonball. You had everything. Topeka and Kansas. Everything was becoming a railroad monopoly. It was becoming spread out like spaghetti. Steel, that iron horse that could churn and move thousands upon thousands of pounds of weight down a track. Oil, 1859. No, not Texas, sorry. Not Louisiana, sorry. Titusville, Pennsylvania. So there. And what did God say? Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8. And I have just scratched the surface. I'd be here all day just talking about all these exciting discoveries, inventions that occurred in the 1800s. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17. Moses is warning the people that when they go into the promised land under Joshua, to be careful. God's going to bless you. You're going to live in houses you didn't build, drink water from wells you didn't have to dig, olive trees, fig trees, vineyards, everything was right there. The warning is this, that when you have all this, you say in your heart, verse 17, my power, yes, and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. It's all come from what I have done. I'm the engineer. I'm the one who figured out how to have a steam engine. I'm the one who figured out how to make steel. I'm the one who knows how to send a telegram. because we look at what has taken place in our lifetime and the progress that man has made and went all the way to the moon, and now we've got bringing back all this information from Mars and the rest of our solar system, the other planets. We've gathered all this information in. We have a space station. It's amazing what's taken place in the 1900s. The point is this: when we do all this and we take the credit for it, then we're in a heap of trouble with the eternal. So now I want to change a little bit. That's what was happening in the 1800s as far as our prosperity. I want to go back and look at our education. Our education. Harvard College is the oldest institute in the U.S., 1636. 1636 is when it was founded. Its motto, and I want you to remember this, its motto is truth. Okay? Now, in 1642, they laid down rules and precepts. It was developed to be a seminary to teach young men and prepare them for the clergy. Where is Cambridge? That's where Harvard is. That's in Massachusetts. It's across the river from Boston, across the Charles River. What they also did was organize grammar schools to prepare young men then to go on to college. This is in the 1600s. In 1642, rules and precepts. Why should anyone go to Harvard? It was to learn that one's main purpose for education and for life is to know God and Jesus Christ. And you can find the principle in John chapter 17, verse 3. Their principle was that Christ would be the foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. And only God, since only God gives wisdom, therefore the need for private, that is in secret, personal prayer. And this is Harvard at its beginning. But what happened in 1805? 1805. Seems like things begin to make some changes in the 1800s. Because we think, well, everything has come about because of the 60s. Our president was assassinated, John F. Kennedy. We was fighting the Vietnam War. We had the Cultural Revolution. We had the Sexual Revolution. There was free sex. There was free ideas. Throw it all off. That's why we're in the shape we are today. But no, as I've done the research, I found that the seeds were sown in the 1800s as far as our nation is concerned. In 1805, a change of ownership, a change of leadership. See, Harvard was founded by the Calvinists, and they viewed that mankind was born in sin. Okay? That was their philosophy, their idea. I can't, you've heard of the purists, the Puritans. The Calvinists is part of that group. But in 1805, the Unitarians took over. What did they believe? Man was born good. But man was also able to be perfected. Therefore, what was needed to keep man becoming better and better, they needed this upward movement of social progress, the need for good works. Therefore, education would be, apart from God, it would be secular, it would be directed by the government. And the belief is this, that the evil in man was the result of poverty and a lack of education. Thus, the need for universal education to end poverty and social injustice. This philosophy, this idea in our universities, Harvard being the oldest. Of course, after that, we had Yale, Princeton, William and Mary, and the denominations, the Christian denominations, they had their schools. But this is the prevalent theory, idea, belief that's now into Harvard. Well, in 1817, Harvard started the law school. If God's already been thrown out, do you think that Harvard would ever consider God's law to teach lawyers that would become judges, that would be able to handle the cases that came up in this nation? No. In 1837, heard of Horace Mann. Horace Mann, Massachusetts, the common school movement. Every child should be educated and it should be funded by local taxes. And women would make the best teachers because they are morally supreme, were superior to men. If you think that's bad enough, a few years before, in 1825, Robert Owen. These are all new men ideas. I had to do all this research. Was from England. He said that if you change the environment, you could change human nature. Now, why I'm bringing this out is to let you know that while we were progressing rapidly as a nation, mightily, something was happening to our educational system. It was going the opposite direction. He said, the roots of evil in society are these institutions. Number one, religion. Number two, marriage. And number three, private property. So what did he do? He bought a town in Indiana called New Harmony and built a society based on these principles. What was happening in Europe that was beginning to influence the United States? What about the theory of evolution? 1859. Karl Marx, heard of him? He lived between 1818 and 1883. Who were beginning to immigrate to the country? See, it was British at first, but now the other countries in Europe's coming. Germany's coming, the Germans. A lot of them settled in Pennsylvania. They're bringing these ideas with them. Where do these ideas go to? The higher education. So after the Civil War, powerful men, when they're looking out across America, they're looking at what's happening, the Industrial Revolution, they're looking at all these children, the generations that's going to come up, and they're saying, okay, since we are the movers and we're the shakers of society, we're going to do something. And privately, they changed the educational system to create a country that was orderly and scientifically managed. Control the children, what they learn, how they're taught, so that people in general would no longer be making decisions. They'd be no longer democratic. To create a workforce, no more thinkers. It was universal, institutionalized, formal, forced schooling. Couldn't have any more Thomas Edisons, Benjamin Franklins. Can't have free thinkers. We've got to bring society into where it will conform to what we see as the future of America. That's the education part. I want to just touch briefly on what was happening in the government. 1804. This is how we settle differences. You put your backs together and you count paces. Okay? And you turn around and you fire. That solves all problems. 1804. The vice president, Aaron Burr, had a duel with Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton died, and Burr went back being the vice president. That's justice. Okay? This is the whole point. I'm coming back to justice. Justice. The War of 1812 lasted 2 years, 8 months. Didn't solve a thing. All we did was try to blow as many ships of the British out of the waters, and they did the same to us. There were some land battles, of course, down here in New Orleans. The peace treaty was already signed, but it did drive the British out. And could never come back again. We've had the Missouri Compromise. We had the Indian Removal Act. We had the Trail of Tears. We had the Dred Scott decision. And of course, the Civil War. How would you like this? In 1856, U.S. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, after delivering a speech, he's a senator, delivers a speech. The next day, representative from South Carolina, Preston Brooks, walks over to the Senate chambers with his cane, decides he'll take care of this problem, and beats Sumner so severely that it took him several years to recover. You talk about the United States being civil, justice. This is in Congress. But here's what's the problem. Our founding fathers have died. George Washington died a couple years after being in office in 1799. Of course, we know that Jefferson and Adams died on the 4th of July in 1826, and Madison was the last one to die in 1836. Speaking of this, what I want to do is turn to Joshua chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24. And verse 31. Joshua chapter 24, verse 31. Israel served the Eternal all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of the Eternal which he had done for Israel. What is happening in government is that our founding fathers are now dying. There's no way to go talk to them and say, well, what did you mean when you wrote this in the Declaration of Independence? What did you mean when you wrote this in the Constitution? They're dead. So what happens when Joshua dies? Let's go to Judges chapter 2, verse 7. Judges chapter 2, verse 7. So the people served the Eternal all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Eternal which he had done for Israel. Dropping down to verse 10, and when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Eternal. How'd that happen? Nor the work which he had done for them. Where's this word of mouth? Where's the teachers? Where's the educators? Where's the priesthood? Where's the scribes? Where is the passing on of truth, knowledge to sustain a society? It's not there. So what happened to the United States? Now we have a judicial system that was designed to be passive, is now being, in our day and age, very active, but it was active back then too. Because now, believe it or not, they use the term what? Justices in the Supreme Court. Justices. And then there's a Chief Justice. You would think the Chief Justice would have his act together. He'd be schooled in God's Word. He would know what the law was. But no, they interpret to their own ideas what the Constitution means. So Congress is a battleground. We know that. The nation was divided into parties. And these gentlemen in this party wanted that man to be president. And the other party wanted the other man to be president. A power struggle. In the 1800s, when our founding fathers died, that's exactly what it was. When Abraham Lincoln was elected, 4 parties. Nation divided into 4 separate parties. So where are we today? Let's go to Exodus chapter 18. Because there's a reason for all that I am saying. God raised up this nation for Abraham's sake, a promise. Not for you and me. You know, it wasn't what I did to serve the eternal. I didn't take my son and lay him on the altar. Abraham did. So Abraham, God says, I will bless your descendants. God doesn't lie. He doesn't make mistakes. It's not his fault. When he says something, it's the truth. He did it for Abraham's sake and for his own sake. But the thing we're learning today is how important we are to God as the church, as the elect, as the called out ones. That we're going to stand for the truth. We're going to stand when no one else can. And that's why God has given to us this beautiful land to enjoy, to prepare us for what's coming. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 21. Moreover, when you shall select from all the people able men, this is Jethro telling Moses what to do. Because Moses is sitting there and he's judging the people from sun up to sundown. He says, moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you and for them, because they won't be bearing the burden, or they will bear the burden with you. That's God's system of justice. But it had to be qualified men, men that feared the eternal. What's the beginning of knowledge? Fear of the Lord, yes. Yes. Did we do that? As a nation back then in the 1800s, did the president try to find a qualified Chief Justice that understood the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights? Or was it not favor, political popularity. The ability to have power. Power corrupts. Power corrupts. Those are the requirements of judging. Now, 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8. In verse 1, it came to pass, 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. That was the system that God wanted. Judges. He didn't need 100 lawyers to come to the judge. And I believe, you can all correct me, but there shouldn't have been any lawyers in our judicial system. If I wanted to go to the local courthouse, I could go talk to the judge and present him my case. Of course, Samuel had two sons, Joel and Abijah. But, in verse 3, his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. And now the nation of Israel is in uproar. We can't have this. You're getting old, Samuel. You're going to die. Your sons don't do it. What do we want? We want a king to be like the rest of the nation. What failed was the judicial system. What's failed in this country? The judicial system. Let's go to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 3. Verse 9. This is Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9. Therefore, give to your servant. God says, what do you want, Solomon? You're now the king. What do you want? You want power, you want prestige, you want money, you want women, you want song, you want all the good things in life? Here's what Solomon says. Therefore, verse 9, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? What does God expect you and me to do? To discern. We should be able to take all the historical accounts of this nation and begin to discern what actually took place. Why we are where we are today. Discernment between what is right, what is wrong, between what is good and what is evil. Not decide what's good and what's evil, but discern. That is, have the mind of God, have the eyes of God, have the ears of God, have that understanding that comes from God to be able to judge righteously and be able to discern between lies and truth. Now, verse 28 of the same chapter. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. What did Solomon do to prove his wisdom? He had two women at each other's throats. Had a live baby and a dead baby. He says, I'll solve this. And they bickered and they argued, and it would drive any man insane. He says, give me a sword. I'll settle this right now. And we know the story. The mother, the real mother, pleaded for her child. Wisdom. Why is all this important? 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Beginning in verse 1. We then, as workers together with him, with Jesus Christ, also plead with you not to receive the grace of... Oops, that's not going to work. 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Here we go. Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? We're not talking about condemnation. This is justice. How to discern what's going on. When we watch the news, when we listen to what's happening, are we able to discern? We're going to judge the world. We know there's a great white throne judgment period, but what about the millennial reign? What about the people that's coming out of captivity? We're going to judge. Yes, we're kings and priests. What did Solomon do? He's a king. What's he doing? He's judging. Jesus Christ is the chief justice. See? We are to be justices, serving under him. And then he goes on to say, do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? Hebrews chapter 5. We should, as a church, be diligent with our calling. We're very special in God's eyes. And he wants us to learn these principles. He wants us to be impartial judges, impartial justices. Because there's no partiality with the eternal. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 13. Well, let me back up verse 12. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone, verse 13, who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age. Doesn't it say we are to become perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect? We are to mature. We grow up. We're no longer tossed to and fro. We're of full age. That those who by reason of use, got to exercise it, have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. See, Satan in the Garden of Eden gave them a shortcut. He says, eat, and you'll know all this. See, Satan's, and I know it's easy to try to say, well, I'm hoping the Republicans can do something this time. No. See, what Satan's doing is he's got two fruits. Neither one is right. But he's trying to entice those one way, and entice the church another way, to get us off track, to lose focus, to lose why we're here, what we're supposed to be learning. We know that we are to have on the armor of God. And God's word, his two-edged sword, is a discerner. All the way to the bone, through the marrow, discerner of what is right and what is wrong. So as we bring this to a close, I was going to read some things, but that's okay. I believe I've got the point across. I do want to close with this. With this statement. Only when there is truth and justice can freedom ring